The Evans family survived almost everything life threw at them on Good Times. Sadly, the actors behind them could not. Many beloved cast members have since passed away, some suddenly and far too young. Let's discover what happened to them and honor the legacies they left behind. Let's begin with John Amos. He was 34 years old when he took on the role of James Evans, Sr. in Good Times in 1974, playing the proud, hard-working father determined to keep his family together through poverty and constant financial struggle. His strength and fierce devotion made James the backbone of the Evans household and one of the show's most powerful father figures. But the same determination that defined James soon created a bitter battle for the man playing him. Amos repeatedly challenged the writers over what he believed was an increasingly stereotypical portrayal of a black working-class family, particularly as JJ's exaggerated comedy began dominating the series. The conflict became so intense that Amos was fired after season 3, and James was abruptly killed off in an automobile accident. Decades later, his final years were overshadowed by another painful conflict, when his daughter Shannon accused her brother KC of elder abuse and financial manipulation involving their father, allegations Amos himself publicly disputed. John Amos died in Los Angeles on August 21, 2024, at the age of 84 from congestive heart failure. He left behind far more than James Evans, including an Emmy-nominated performance in Roots, memorable roles in Coming to America, Die Hard 2, and The West Wing, and a legacy as an actor who was willing to risk one of television's biggest roles to defend the image of the family he portrayed. Next came Esther Rolle as Florida Evans. At 53, she became the strong but loving mother at the center of the Evans family, struggling to raise her children with dignity, while poverty constantly threatened to pull them apart. Rolle brought such conviction to Florida that when she believed Good Times was betraying the very family it was supposed to represent, she was willing to risk her own place on the show. Her anger centered on the growing popularity of J.J. Evans and his exaggerated die-no-might persona, which she felt was turning a young black man into a stereotype, while the show's more serious family stories disappeared into the background. The disagreement became so bitter that Rolle walked away after the 4th season, surrendering one of television's most recognizable roles rather than remain silent. She returned for the 6th and final season only after changes were promised, making her departure one of the most remarkable acts of protest by a sitcom star of that era. Away from Good Times, she proved exactly why she had fought to be taken seriously, winning an Emmy for Summer of My German Soldier, and later appearing in Driving Miss Daisy and Rosewood. But her final years brought a battle she could not simply walk away from. Diabetes severely damaged her health, yet she continued acting and supporting theater and civil rights causes for as long as she could. Rolle died on November 17, 1998, at the age of 78 from complications of diabetes. She left behind more than an iconic television mother. She became remembered as an actress willing to sacrifice fame itself rather than stay silent about the dignity of the people she represented. We have Jeanette DuBois. She was 41 years old when she began playing Willona Woods, Florida Evans's stylish, outspoken best friend and next-door neighbor who later became a devoted adoptive mother to Penny. DuBois gave Willona a mixture of humor, confidence, and warmth that made her one of the most beloved women on Good Times. But away from the laughter, her own journey through Hollywood was far more difficult. As a black woman trying to move beyond acting into music, writing, and producing, DuBois spent years pushing against racial barriers and an industry that offered women like her far fewer opportunities, while even conflicting reports about her birth year followed her throughout her career. She nevertheless continued creating and remained active in the arts well into her later years. On February 17, 2020, DuBois died unexpectedly in her sleep at her home in Glendale, California, at the age of 87, with her death certificate citing cardiac arrest among the causes. What she left behind reached far beyond Willona Woods. DuBois co-wrote and sang the unforgettable Jeffersons theme, "Movin' On Up," won 2 Emmy Awards for her voice work on the PJs, appeared in films including I'm Gonna Get You Sucka and Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, and helped co-found the Pan-African Film and Arts Festival, leaving a legacy that stretched across television, music, and opportunities for a new generation of Black artists. Up next was Johnny Brown. He was already 38 when he joined Good Times as Nathan Bookman in 1975, the building superintendent whose constant battles with the Evans family made him one of their favorite targets for jokes. His booming voice and effortless comic timing turned Bookman from an annoying landlord into one of the neighborhood's most recognizable personalities. Yet behind those laughs was a frustration Brown could never completely escape. Bookman's weight became a recurring punchline, most famously through the nickname Buffalo Butt, while Brown himself struggled against being typecast because of his size and comic image, limiting his opportunities for more serious dramatic roles. On March 2nd, 2022, Johnny Brown suffered a heart attack shortly after leaving a doctor's appointment and died at the age of 84. He left behind a career stretching across television, music, comedy, and Broadway, including Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and Golden Boy alongside Sammy Davis Jr., while Nathan Bookman remained the role that generations of Good Times viewers would remember most. Then came Ben Powers. At just 28 years old, he stepped into Good Times as Keith Anderson, the promising football player who fell in love with Thelma Evans and eventually became her husband. Their hopeful future took a painful turn when Keith injured his knee on their wedding day, threatening both his football career and their new marriage. But once the cameras stopped rolling, Powers faced an even more uncertain future of his own. After Good Times ended, the major roles he hoped for never truly arrived, and appearances in Cheech and Chong's next movie and The New Odd Couple failed to give his career lasting momentum. Eventually, he walked away from Hollywood and returned to a quieter life in New England, where he continued performing music locally. Years later, Powers developed liver cancer and fought the disease largely away from public attention. He died on April 6, 2015, at the age of 64. Powers left behind work in The New Odd Couple and Cheech and Chong's next movie, but for generations of viewers, Keith Anderson remained the role that permanently tied his name to Good Times. Now we turn to Sweet Daddy Williams, the flamboyant neighborhood loan shark brought to life by Teddy Wilson when he was 32 years old. With his flashy clothes, booming voice, and effortless swagger, Wilson transformed Sweet Daddy into a man who could intimidate the Evans family and make audiences laugh almost in the same breath. Yet away from that larger-than-life character, Wilson's own story was heading toward a shockingly early ending. He continued working steadily in television and married actress Joan Pringle in 1980, but while his career was still active, his health suddenly collapsed after he suffered a devastating stroke. Teddy Wilson died from complications of that stroke on July 21, 1991, at only 47 years old, cutting short a career that still had years ahead of it. He left behind memorable appearances in That's My Mama, Sanford and Son, The Waltons, Roll Out, and You Take the Kids, as well as Sweet Daddy Williams, one of the most colorful recurring characters ever to walk through the world of Good Times. From there came Moses Gunn. He was 47 years old when he joined Good Times in 1977 as Carl Dixon, the tough, outspoken shop owner who unexpectedly fell in love with Florida Evans and eventually became her second husband. Their relationship gave Florida a chance at happiness after James's death, although Carl's diagnosis with lung cancer brought a much darker turn to their story. Away from the screen, Gunn was fighting a serious health battle of his own. Chronic asthma plagued him for years and increasingly threatened his breathing, even as he continued working on stage and television. He remained active almost until the end, including work connected with homicide, Life on the Street, while sharing his life with his wife Gwen Mitchell, whom he had married in 1966. Moses Gunn died on December 16, 1993, at the age of 64 from complications of asthma. He left behind a remarkable legacy stretching far beyond Good Times, an Obie Award, a Tony nomination for The Iceman Cometh, and memorable performances in Shaft, Ragtime, and The Never-Ending Story, securing his reputation as one of the most distinguished character actors of his generation. Up next was Weeping Wanda Williams, the perpetually emotional neighbor played by Helen Martin, already 67 when she arrived on Good Times in 1977. Wanda seemed to appear whenever there was a funeral or neighborhood tragedy, and Martin turned her endless crying into a recurring joke audiences could recognize almost instantly. But behind that comic character was an actress who had spent decades waiting for Hollywood to finally notice her. Despite helping found the groundbreaking American Negro Theater and devoting much of her early life to the stage, Martin struggled against racial barriers that kept substantial screen roles and financial security painfully out of reach. Remarkably, her greatest recognition arrived when most performers would already have retired, with 227 finally making her widely known as Pearl Shea in her 70s. Martin continued acting deep into old age, appearing in Hollywood Shuffle, Don't Be a Menace, and Bulworth. She died from a heart attack on March 25, 2000, at the age of 90. Martin left behind not only decades of film and television work, but the extraordinary story of a performer who waited most of her life for success, and was still working when it finally found her. Then there is Matthew Stymie Beard. At 49 years old, he appeared on Good Times in 1974 as Monty, one of the neighborhood faces who briefly became part of the world surrounding the Evans family. Though his role was small, older viewers could immediately recognize the former child star who had once been one of the most familiar faces in American comedy. But behind that familiar smile was a life that had nearly been destroyed after childhood fame disappeared. Beard spent close to 2 decades struggling with heroin addiction, arrests, and periods behind bars before entering treatment at Synanon and gradually rebuilding his life during the 1970s. His comeback brought appearances in The Jeffersons and The Buddy Holly Story, but it would not last long. After suffering a severe stroke, Beard developed pneumonia and died on January 8, 1981, only 1 week after his 56th birthday. He left behind later television and film work, but his greatest legacy remained Stymie in Our Gang, or The Little Rascals, the childhood role that made him an enduring part of American screen history. Now entering the Good Times story was 33-year-old Bubba Smith as Claude in 1978, bringing the enormous physical presence of a former NFL defensive star into the Evans family's Chicago neighborhood. Even in a brief role, his towering frame made him almost impossible to miss. Yet the body that had made Smith famous would eventually carry the hidden damage of years spent playing professional football. Chronic joint problems followed him after retirement, and later research on his brain found evidence of CTE, adding another tragic dimension to the physical price of his football career. On August 3, 2011, Smith was found dead at his Los Angeles home at the age of 66. The coroner attributed his death to acute phentermine intoxication, with hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease listed as contributing conditions. Smith nevertheless left behind 2 very different legacies. On the field, he became an NFL star and Super Bowl V champion, while on screen, his gentle giant, Moses Hightower, in the Police Academy films transformed him into a comedy favorite recognized around the world. Next, we have Richard Ward. He was already 60 years old when he played Henry Evans, the father of James Evans and grandfather of J.J., Thelma, and Michael. His appearance briefly opened another generation of the Evans family, revealing more of the background behind the tough father viewers already knew. But Ward's own road to television had been far harder than his brief appearance suggested. Before acting, he had worked as a police officer and professional boxer, then spent years trying to establish himself as a black actor during an era when substantial Hollywood roles were painfully limited. Just as his film career was gaining new momentum, his health suddenly failed. Richard Ward died on July 1, 1979, at only 64 years old following a heart attack, shortly after completing work on The Jerk with Steve Martin. He left behind memorable performances in Across 110th Street, Mandingo, and The Jerk, preserving the legacy of a character actor whose greatest opportunities arrived tragically late in life. Now we have Hortense Dobbs was played Alice Ghostley, whose unmistakable comic delivery made even a guest appearance instantly recognizable when she was 53 years old. Ghostley gave Hortense the same nervous, eccentric energy that had already made her one of television's most distinctive character actresses. Yet the final chapter of Ghostley's life became painfully different from the laughter that had defined her career. In 2003, she lost Felice Orlandi, her husband of 50 years, and her own health deteriorated during the years that followed as she battled colon cancer and suffered a series of strokes. Alice Ghostley died on September 21, 2007, at the age of 84, after years of serious illness. She left behind a Tony Award-winning stage career and an extraordinary collection of television roles, most famously the bumbling witch Esmeralda on Bewitched and the wonderfully eccentric Bernice Clifton on Designing Women, characters that ensured her unique style of comedy would survive long after her final performance. Moving on came Ron Glass. At just 29, he became Mr. Pearson, one of his early television roles before Hollywood audiences truly knew his name. Though his time in the series was brief, it came just before the breakthrough that would transform him from a working guest actor into a familiar television face. But away from the success that followed, Glass guarded his private life so carefully that even his final health struggle remained largely hidden from the public. He never married and spent his later years quietly dealing with serious respiratory problems, while continuing to take occasional acting and voice roles. Ron Glass died on November 25, 2016, at the age of 71 from respiratory failure. He left behind an Emmy-nominated performance as the stylish detective Ron Harris in Barney Miller, later found an entirely new generation of fans as the mysterious Shepherd Book in Firefly and Serenity, and continued appearing in series including CSI and Agents of SHIELD, a career that ultimately stretched far beyond his small early appearance on Good Times. Now we come to Jimmie Walker, who was 26 years old when he became James J.J. Evans Jr., the lanky, wisecracking eldest son of James and Florida Evans, whose dreams of becoming an artist were matched only by his talent for turning the family's troubles into laughter. His exaggerated expressions and explosive "dynamite" catchphrase quickly transformed JJ from one member of the Evans family into the breakout sensation of the entire series. But the bigger JJ became with audiences, the more uncomfortable things grew behind the cameras. Esther Rolle and John Amos strongly objected to the increasing emphasis on JJ's clownish behavior, arguing that the character was drifting into a damaging stereotype and pulling Good Times away from its original portrayal of a struggling but dignified black family. Walker, however, defended the comedy that had made the character so popular, and the disagreement contributed to a deep divide between him and the actors playing his parents that lingered long after the series ended. Controversy followed him in later decades as well, particularly after his outspoken conservative political views and comments on social issues drew criticism from some longtime fans. Yet Walker never abandoned the stage that first shaped him. After Good Times, he continued performing stand-up comedy while appearing in projects such as The Love Boat and Airplane 2, the sequel. Now, Walker is 79 years old and remains active on the comedy circuit and continues making podcast and media appearances. His career brought him Golden Globe recognition, but his greatest legacy remains J.J. Evans and that single unforgettable cry of "Dynamite," a catchphrase that helped turn him into one of the most recognizable sitcom stars of the 1970s. From there came Ralph Carter, only 12 years old when he joined Good Times in 1974 as Michael Evans, the youngest child of James and Florida, whose intelligence, political awareness, and willingness to challenge adults earned him the nickname the Militant Midget. Unlike his joke-loving older brother JJ, Michael often became the serious voice of the Evans children, dreaming of a better future while questioning the inequality surrounding his family. But once Good Times ended, Carter discovered how difficult it could be for a child star to build an identity beyond the character America had watched him grow up playing. He attempted to expand into music, releasing material including When You're Young and in Love, but his recording career never produced the lasting commercial breakthrough he had hoped for, and major Hollywood roles gradually became scarce. Rather than spend decades chasing his former television fame, Carter largely stepped away from screen acting and returned to the theatrical and artistic world where his career had actually begun. His personal life also went through major changes, including a marriage to Lisa Parks that ended in divorce before he later married River York. Now, at 65 years old, Carter lives largely outside the Hollywood spotlight and remains connected to theater and the arts. His legacy, however, began even before Good Times. His acclaimed Broadway work in Raisin earned him a Tony nomination while still remarkably young, while Michael Evans made him part of one of the most recognizable television families of the 1970s. Up next was 20-year-old Bernadette Stanis, who stepped into Good Times in 1974 as Thelma Evans, the intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely independent daughter caught between her dreams for the future and the financial reality facing the Evans family. Thelma's combination of confidence, humor, and beauty made Stanis one of television's most recognizable young actresses of the decade, while her eventual romance and marriage to Keith Anderson gave the character one of the show's biggest later storylines. Yet, away from the Evans apartment, Stanis would eventually face a family tragedy far more painful than anything written for Thelma. Her romantic life went through several difficult chapters, including multiple marriages, before she found greater stability. But the deepest heartbreak came when her mother developed Alzheimer's disease. Stanis watched the woman who had supported her career gradually lose her memory, and she devoted significant time to caring for her as the illness progressed until her mother's death. That experience ultimately transformed grief into a new purpose. By 2026, Stanis is 72 years old and remains active as an author, speaker, and Alzheimer's awareness advocate, using her public platform to support families facing the same disease through her charitable work. She has also written books, including Situations and The Last Night. But for millions of viewers, her enduring legacy remains Thelma Evans, the daughter who brought intelligence, determination, and a new image of young black womanhood into American homes every week. Then came Janet Jackson. She was only 11 years old when she joined Good Times in 1977 as Millicent Penny Woods, the abused young girl rescued from a troubled home who eventually found safety and a new mother when Willona Woods adopted her. Penny's painful storyline demanded surprising emotional depth from Jackson at such a young age, introducing millions of viewers to the girl who would later become far more famous for music than television. But the extraordinary fame that followed would bring pressures far greater than anything the young actress could have imagined. Growing up inside the Jackson family meant living under intense expectations and constant public scrutiny, while her adult life brought 3 complicated marriages to James DeBarge, Renee Elizondo Jr., and Wissam Almana. Then came the moment that nearly derailed everything. During the 2004 Super Bowl halftime show with Justin Timberlake, a wardrobe malfunction exposed Jackson's breast for a fraction of a second, triggering enormous public outrage and severe professional fallout, including sharply reduced support from major radio and television outlets. The controversy followed her for years, even as the wider cultural conversation eventually began reassessing how disproportionately she had been blamed. Now, at 60 years old, Jackson remains an internationally recognized performer with a career spanning music, television, and live performance. She has sold more than 100 million records worldwide, won 5 Grammy Awards, and created landmark albums including Control and Rhythm Nation 1814. What began with a vulnerable little girl named Penny ultimately became one of the most influential careers in modern pop music. Finally, Good Times introduced an 8-year-old Kim Fields in 1978 as Kim, a young guest character who appeared in 2 episodes near the end of the series. Her time on the show was brief, but it became one of the earliest television steps in a career that would soon make her one of America's best-known child stars. Yet growing up on television created a label Fields would spend years trying to escape. Soon after Good Times, she became famous as Tootie Ramsey on The Facts of Life, and later successfully reinvented herself as the glamorous Regine Hunter on Living Single. But when Fields moved behind the camera, she entered another difficult chapter, working to establish herself as a black female director in a television industry where women of color historically received far fewer opportunities. Her personal life also changed along the way. Her first marriage to Jonathan Freeman ended in divorce before she married Christopher Morgan in 2007 and built a family with him. Rather than allowing her childhood fame to define the limits of her career, Fields gradually turned decades of on-set experience into a second profession as a director and producer. In 2026, at 57 years old, she continues working in television, including acting in The Upshaws, while maintaining an extensive directing resume. From The Facts of Life and Living Single to decades of work behind the camera, Fields transformed what could have been a short-lived child star story into a television career spanning nearly half a century. So that's our tribute to the beloved Good Times actors who have sadly passed away. Which star do you miss the most, and what memory of them still makes you smile? Share your memories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we keep their unforgettable legacies alive.